This is episode number 22 with Jeanne Sakata. Coming up.
I'm grateful that all these things are happening and that there are so many more opportunities than there used to be. And when I'm tempted to feel overwhelmed, as sometimes I do, I really just try to go to that place of gratitude. Where I would listen to him and I would think, oh, that's what that teacher was talking about. Protest me, the baby of a god, hands under a mockery, he would just ride the vowels naturally. Just as a native speaker of Spanish, it was just thrilling to listen to him. I think when I discovered Gordon's toy, it was so full of light and redemption. For all those years of dealing with and absorbing and wrestling with that pain, with that psychic pain.
Perhaps you discovered your passion for acting later in life, or maybe you didn't get the early start on this career you think you need. Well, our guest today was in the exact same spot, and she still pursued it and has experienced quite a bit of success. Hey there, my name is Nathan Agan, and this is The Working Actor's Journey, bringing you in-depth conversations with actors that have been working professionally for decades. Hope you're doing well out there. We continue with Season 3, and if you're just joining us, there are over 20 episodes with fantastic actors you'll want to check out. These conversations are meant to inspire and reassure you on your journey that the road may be long and challenging, and that it is ultimately rewarding. Think of these guests like your personal acting mentors. You may not know it yet, but one of them could change your life. We have a new free guide to download. It's called 10 Ways to Stop Worrying and Start Working. Discover the mindset of working actors. Inside this online guide are 10 specific ways you can stop worrying and start working when it comes to being an actor. Hear thoughts, ideas, and advice from those who have been acting 40 plus years, taken from excerpts from past episodes. These guests do not know everything, nor is everything easy for them. They just have been around long enough to have figured out a few things, and they are sharing this with you. Get your copy of the guide now at workingactorsjourney.com/sign up, and there's also a link in the episode description and on the show notes. Today on the show is actress and playwright Jeanne Sakata, with a 30-plus year career spanning theater, film, television, and voiceover. She was in 2 different stage productions this past year, both with notable companies jumping from Shakespeare to new plays, appearing in Othello at A Noise Within in Pasadena, California, and in Do You Feel Anger at the Vineyard Theatre in New York. For her first play, Jeanne wrote the celebrated and award-winning solo show Hold These Truths, based on the life of Gordon Hirabayashi, a Japanese-American student at the University of Washington who challenged the American government during World War II. Jeanne and I definitely chat about this play and all the different ways it intersects and connects with her own life. Plus, it's just such a fascinating story. The show has been produced all over the country and recently in Canada. And for those in Southern California, you can check out Hold These Truths at San Diego Rep, where the show opens November 14th. I've seen the play, it's an amazing story and a great production. So in today's episode, Jeanne and I cover growing up on a lettuce farm right near the railroad tracks, thinking she would be a journalist and majoring in English at UCLA, how acting and therapy both came into her life at the same time, how the Spanish language opened her eyes to working on Shakespeare, her deep need to tell Gordon's story based on her own family's history, how her marriage and relationship has lasted over 40 years, and so much more. Jeanne has such a great attitude toward celebrating your successes, allowing for flow, and being open to multiple approaches. And she even shares how she worked on a monologue with a Cambodian accent for a TV show, so don't miss that. Now, if you're enjoying these episodes, I want to let you know you can also become a premium member of the show, and there are a number of different perks, including bonus episodes, exclusive opportunities, and more. Members can hear additional conversations with past guests Robert Pine, Don Diduick, Richard Reilly, and Tony winner Reed Birney. Head over to workingactorsjourney.com/premium to find out more and become a member. A special shout out to those at the co-star level or higher. Adam, Jeff, Robert, Ken, and Ralph. Thrilled that you all are members. So here's a bit more about Jeanne's career. She has worked at acclaimed regional theaters all over the country, including in New York, Seattle, Portland, the Bay Area, and numerous theaters in Southern California. Jeanne has played opposite such legendary actors as Chita Rivera, Estelle Parsons, and Raul Julia. She is a member of LA's award-winning classical group, the Antaeus Company. She won a Los Angeles Ovation Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in Che Yu's Red at East West Players. She was awarded the Lee Melville Award for Outstanding Contribution to the Los Angeles Theater Community, Playwrights Arena, and the Dramalog Outstanding Performance Award for her work in The Maids at East West Players. Jeanne has over 40 credits on film and TV, including recurring parts on the shows Dr. Ken and High School Musical, The Series. And she has even appeared in Justin Lin's Yum Yum F web series, which we do talk about, and you'll learn what that means if you don't already. It's pretty hilarious. I feel fortunate to call Jeanne a peer and friend, and we've even shared the stage a couple of brief times. I'm very honored she's here, and I hope you enjoy this one. Don't forget about Jeanne's play Hold These Truths at San Diego Rep starting November 14th. So here we go with episode number 22. Please enjoy my chat with Jeanne Sakata. Now, you were saying that you had just had a bunch of auditions come up recently. And was that for TV and film or theater?
Really, for both. I had one that came up for theater, a very intensely emotional scene. I had several commercial auditions that came up and several television auditions as well. And in addition to that, I've been trying to work on a new play. So there have been a lot of burners burning, or a lot of pots on the burners burning, I should say.
Do you find that those things come in waves for you, that there's just kind of a flurry of auditions, or are you fortunate in that things are pretty, you're busy consistently in terms of preparing something?
Well, it used to be that the auditions would come and I would put my actor's hat on and I would pay attention to preparing for those auditions. And then there would be a kind of more delineated boundary line, in the old days. Mm-hmm. And, then it's partly why I turned to writing, because I had a back injury actually, and I had a lot of time on my hands. And that's when I started seriously thinking about developing a play, which became my play about Gordon Hirabayashi, my solo play, called Hold These Truths.
Right.
But now Hold These Truths has been going on for over a decade now, and I've gotten a commission from LA Theater Works to start a new play. So I'm doing research for that, and the auditions come in. And now I'm finding that I'm, kind of bouncing from one thing to another much quicker than I used to. It used to be that I would be a playwright for a while, and then I'd have an audition and go back to being a playwright and then back to auditioning. But now it seems like everything is happening at once. So it's been a really interesting time to just approach everything in a much more relaxed way, kind of like a basketball player that's, bouncing the ball and heading towards the basket. And all of a sudden, intercepted, and now we're going back and on defense, and then this way and that way and that. So there's a kind of ricocheting quality to what I'm doing now,
sure,
which is really interesting and really fascinating and really challenging. And I think I just have to kind of let loose the grip in terms of saying, all right, this is my writing time and this is my acting time, and just allowing for a flow of things to happen that are very different, audition for a commercial, and then research for the play, and then audition for a TV show, and then audition for a theater play, and then back to researching and writing. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting time.
Well, and it sounds like what you're doing is, the stereotypical waiting by the phone to call, that you're not doing that you are proactively keeping yourself busy with other things. And specifically, right now the playwriting is one of those things. But did you find that difficult, in your maybe earlier days of the times between auditions of what do I do with myself? What do I do with my time? Like, how do I not stress about the lack of auditions I have? Did you ever have that, and how did you get through it?
Yes, it's very interesting. I think because in the last few years, there has been a much greater push on the part of people in the entertainment industry, a wonderful push to give actors of color more of a chance in auditioning for roles that used to be just, for Caucasian actors. There's been much more of a awareness that there needs to be more diversity in casting, and not just in supporting roles, but in lead roles and in serious regular roles. So we've seen much more of that. And I think that accounts for the fact that there are more auditions for us now, for us actors of Asian ancestry, because it's interesting. I didn't used to audition this much. And when I was a younger actor, if I was doing well, if 2 or 3 auditions came up per month. And now that's, I think, kind of the norm, at least 2 or 3 auditions per month. But it used to be, like I said, that my time as a writer and my time as an actor was much more delineated. I would have either one or the other. And so I would be free to devote my energy exclusively to one or the other.
Right.
And now it's really that I have this pool of energy, and it just has to flow from one thing to another, being an actor to a writer to sometimes a producer, and back and forth again. Right. So I really find that challenging. It's an exciting challenge right now, but it's a new challenge, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think what fuels it all for me right now is gratitude, because I'm grateful that all these things are happening and that there are so many more opportunities than there used to be. And when I'm tempted to feel overwhelmed, as sometimes I do, I really just try back to go to that place of gratitude. And I think that fortifies the energy that I have for all these different challenges, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And of course, the more interviews I have, I guess my brain is wired in a way that I can kind of retain to some degree a lot of the episodes. And I remember Armin Shimmerman talking about one of the big themes he talked about was gratitude. And he said, he's just like, I have just been so fortunate and blessed. I think he even used the phrase like there's like been like a cornucopia of blessings in his life that, he'd be silly not to be grateful for it all.
Yes. But it's a thing that I think we have to consciously practice, conscious gratitude.
Yes.
Because it's very easy, we want more, we want something we don't have, and then we get it. And then we want the next thing. And I think that it has sort of a maelstrom effect. You're constantly swirling around in this culture of wanting more. And I find it really helpful and necessary to step back from time to time and just count the things that have happened in the last year or so. Be grateful for each thing. Take the time to really feel that gratitude. And it has a calming effect, I think, for me, on that culture of wanting
Right.
more and more and more.
Yeah, and right. And there's also the part that goes along with it, I think, is celebrating our successes, however big or small they might be.
Absolutely.
That, we're in a culture where it's easy to just kind of rush by things. And,
yes.
Even if it's,
so true.
Yeah. Even if, there's just, you got your headshot to another casting office or whatever it is, whatever the, obstacle was or the mountain you had to climb, that you're celebrating those small things because, of course, that's what leads to any large thing. It's all these little steps.
Yes, absolutely. I am a big believer in celebrating the little small steps that we tend to just rush by, as you say, Nathan. But, it's interesting because I'm preparing for 3 productions of Holy Truths that will be coming up in the next year.
Right.
And I was, as part of that introduction, preparing a list of those productions. And I was really quite astonished to see how many there had been. And while I was preparing for those auditions, it's been over 20, wow. I wasn't really consciously aware of how many there had been because I was just focused on getting that photo to this theater and getting that essay written for the program, and of this production. And I didn't realize up until quite recently just how many there had been in the past 12 years. So that was really amazing to just drink all that in and just enjoy the fact that it had been an amazing, incredible ride so far. And It's not over yet. Yeah.
Well, I do definitely want to talk more about the show, but you and your, path to that. And I want to kind of go back and track a little bit of your early years. And so you grew up in Santa Cruz. Is that correct?
Actually, I grew up just a little south of Santa Cruz in farming town.
Okay.
Called Watsonville.
Oh, okay.
Watsonville, yeah.
And
in the Pajaro Valley.
Okay.
Pajaro is a Spanish word for bird.
Oh,
and
okay.
So, and up until 8 years old, I was in a little house in the middle of my grandfather's iceberg lettuce fields.
Oh, wow.
Just a little ways down from the Southern Pacific Railroad tracks. So I literally grew up until the age of 8, right by the railroad tracks.
and
just surrounded by, fields of crops.
Right. And so, like, your parents or even your grandparents, were they born in this country, or were you the first generation born in this country?
My parents were born in this country.
Okay.
The first generations of Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans are referred to as Issei, Nisei, and Sansei.
Oh, okay.
Ichi ni san is 1, 2, 3 in Japanese. And so the first generation who were immigrants who were born in Japan and immigrated, they were called the Issei. Right. And they would be my grandparents' generation. And then the second generation, which would be the first American-born generation, would be their children, my father and mother's generation, the Nisei.
All right.
And then the children of the Nisei, which is my generation, we are called the Sansei, the third generation. And so our children are called the Yonsei, or fourth generation.
Cool. I only know like a sliver of Japanese culture, but I always enjoy like how much of a sense of history and tradition there is, whether it's in the language or just the culture. I think it's really cool.
Yes. I have lovely memories of growing up hearing Japanese and English, and as I've gotten older, I just treasure those memories more and more. The sounds of the Japanese and English in the same household.
This, again, I think it'll be impossible for us not to like touch on your play in almost any area of your life. But one of the things I was thinking about as I was looking at the, time period when you were born and all that, that was not that long after the war. And I was curious, if your family had any experiences with the internment camps, during the war, and how that might have impacted, their way of life, even post-war, growing up, being in California.
Yes. My mother's side of the family lived in Colorado, so they were not imprisoned during World War II.
Okay.
There's plenty of racism, of course, in Colorado, but the orders that came out from the government concerned the West Coast mostly, and parts of Arizona, and it was military zones that were designated by the government. That meant that Executive Order 9066 stated that anyone within these military zones that were designated by the government could be forcibly removed. And so, since that did not include states like Colorado in the middle of the United States, they did not have to go. But my father's side of the family, they all had to go. Wow. They were all living, the majority of them were living at the time in Watsonville, California, which is just south of Santa Cruz. And they had just a few days to really pack up their belongings and to put their things in storage, and to my grandfather to put his property and his business into the hands of people that fortunately said they would take care of them for him. And then they had to go to the Salinas assembly centers in the fairgrounds there. And so they spent some time there, and then they had to ship out to Arizona, to the Poston camps in Arizona, the barbed wire camps there. So they spent about a year there. They were fortunate because they didn't have to spend that much time compared to other families who had to spend several years there. And this is because my grandfather, being a farmer, was able to give advice on how to, for example, bring in water to irrigate crops that they were trying to grow in the desert, in the Poston camps. And because of the fact that he was able to give that sort of valuable advice, he was able to leave after a year. But he didn't really go back to Watsonville immediately. He actually went up to Oregon and took part in some farming operations up there, and then eventually made his way back to Watsonville.
Wow.
And he was very lucky because he did not lose his business. He didn't lose his business or his property, as many Japanese American families did, because he had people who held it in good trust for him until he returned. But there was huge property losses, on the part of many other Japanese American families when they came back.
Of course.
Either their businesses were taken over, they were swindled out of their land, things that they held in storage were looted. So there were huge property losses, and I think my grandfather was just incredibly fortunate.
Yeah.
One of the fortunate few. Yeah.
Right. Talk about gratitude again.
Yes. But you're right. This happened in the early 1940s.
Yeah.
And I was born in 1954. So it was just a decade after, camps and all that had happened when I was born. And growing up, I definitely sensed as a child, even though I couldn't put it into words, that was a period of shame and of hiding and of great spiritual darkness for them.
Yeah.
And they did not want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I discovered that as I was growing up. Every time I brought it up, the subject was quickly changed, or they would give like one or two words to questions I asked, and then they would change the subject.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to, of course, relate to an experience that, you haven't been through yourself. And so, they were just, I'm sure, processing it as best as they could. Unbelievable. Yes. Now, you said you were there until 8. So then where did your family move after that?
We moved to the suburbs of Watsonville.
Oh, okay.
We moved out of we moved away from the railroad tracks and out of the fields, out of the boonies, so to speak, into a residential neighborhood. My mother was very excited about this because it meant we were actually in a neighborhood with neighbors and houses around instead of, dirt.
Right.
So we had neighbors and a neighborhood for the very first time. And this was, a really exciting development for us all. And, I didn't really miss the lettuce fields and the dirt because I was excited at the prospect of, having a sidewalk that I could roller skate on and things like this.
Sure.
but looking back, I'm really glad I had both.
Yeah.
That I had that rural experience as well as, the world of suburbia.
Yeah. And so as you were, growing up in that area, what kind of things were you involved in? Were you into the sports, into arts, both? Where did your interest lie?
I got involved with Pee Wee League. So I played softball. I was the only girl on an all boys team for a while.
Oh, wow.
I was a huge tomboy. So I was very proud of that, even though I made them sink in the league. And I think we tied for last place. But I also got involved with Girl Scouts, became a brownie.
Sure.
And, all that. And it was just really great to have friends whose houses I could walk over to and, have slumber parties with eventually and, and all that.
Right.
Yeah. And it was really lovely to see my mom. She was really, really happy to, be in a neighborhood and just to see her be able to have the advantages of a little nicer home.
Sure.
And, yeah. So it was a real change.
Cool. Very cool. And what kind of things did your parents do in terms of work
my
or
dad was
hobbies?
a farmer. Yeah. My grandfather, started a business when he came over, and he was very fortunate because he was able to join up with two people that were from his village in Japan.
Oh, wow.
And the three of them had a farming business together. They actually started out in Lompoc. And they were able to, they did very well. Some of it was, I think, shrewd planning and some of it was luck. And they farmed, bushberries and beans, and they were able eventually to purchase some land, which was very unusual for a Japanese of that time.
Sure.
Because what happened was California passed the Alien Land Law, which made it illegal for Japanese immigrants to own land, but they had purchased their land right before that happened. So they were able to kind of have a leg up in terms of moving up, in the farming world. And eventually, my grandfather was able to establish himself in Watsonville. He bought out his two uncles who took their earned American fortune and went back to Japan. And so he was able to summon his bride with my grandmother, who was actually kind of a distant cousin of his from the same Japanese village he was from. And he began a family, and he started a business, farming and shipping business in Watsonville, California, called Sakata Ranches. And he was able to hook up with a Caucasian man named Travers. So for a while, they had a business called Travers and Sakata, and then eventually my grandfather bought Travers out. And so he had this really thriving business right when World War II broke out.
Wow.
And as I said, because he was in partnership with Travers and had pretty good standing in the farming community around the Watsonville, Salinas area, he was able to have people hold his business till he came back. And so that was sort of the environment that I grew up in, as a Japanese American farming family.
Right.
And with different generations. And so when I came to write my solo show about Gordon Hirabayashi, Hold These Truths, Gordon was from that same kind of background.
Oh, wow.
And so I felt like I knew that world.
Sure.
He grew up in a religious environment, a Christian environment. It was an unusual one because his family belonged to this sect called the Mukyokai, which means, I think, Friends of the World. They were very much like the Quakers. And I grew up in a Japanese American Presbyterian home, so not really like the Quakers, but still there were enough similarities so that I felt very comfortable writing about Gordon.
Yeah.
I felt like, oh yes, I know the world that he's from.
Very cool.
I know that dirt of the fields, and I know the lettuce, what it looks like when it's, first sprouts out of the ground, and I know the hymns his family would have sang.
Wow.
So all that came into play when I wrote my solo show.
Very cool. And so at what point was it in high school that you started to have an inkling or interest in acting, or did that come in then?
It didn't then, only in terms of envy. I really envied the kids that were, in the thespian society and that would put on plays, and I would go see these dramatic productions that my high school put on, and I said, oh man, I wish I could do that. But I didn't think I had any talent for that. And so I went to college with the aim to be a journalism major. I did love to write.
Wow.
And I thought that I would either be a broadcast journalist or international journalist or reporter. And so I majored in English at UCLA. And then somewhere around my junior or senior year, I found out about this Asian American theater company called East West Players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they were over there in Vermont in East Hollywood. And they were doing a play called And the Soul Shall Dance, written by Wakako Yamauchi, who is of my father's generation, the Nisei generation. And she had written a play about Japanese American farmers, about this Japanese American farming family in the Imperial Valley. And I was so enthralled because at UCLA, I had trouble deciding what to major in. I majored in English, but I knew that I didn't want to just devote my studies to English literature. I was really interested in music, in drama, in cultural anthropology, in history, in dance, in choir, singing. And I thought that I wanted to have a life that included all these other things as well.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And when I went to see And the Soul Shall Dance, it was like a ton of bricks hit me, because not only was I discovering the world of theater, I was discovering that there were Asian American plays about people like me, right, about Japanese American farming families. I did not know that up until that point. There was no theater really to speak of in Watsonville that I knew about. Mm-hmm. Actually, years later, I found out there was theater in San Juan Bautista, Luis Valdez and Teatro Casino.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know enough to know that. And so, I was so thrilled to find out about East West Players and, playwrights like Wakako Yamauchi. And so that planted a seed. And eventually I took the first East West Players summer workshop, which was in the early 1980s. And, that's when the bug bit, and that really changed my life. Okay. Seeing Wakako's play, yeah. All
right, so now I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, and I want to get back, but I'm curious how important it was for you to be part of the East West Players company, or at least, within that world. And was that something you had been looking for in terms of a way to connect more with your culture? I know sometimes there are people who, sometimes in the arts, but was that ever something you resisted or tried to distance yourself from? Like, not embracing, your full Asian heritage and all that kind of stuff? Or
yes, well, I think many people of color, we go through that. We grow up in our early years, we don't see ourselves reflected on television or in the movies or in literature. And we start wishing very much that we were Caucasian. Sure. And it breeds a kind of self-esteem problem where you as an American of Asian ancestry are somehow less than a Caucasian American. And I think it takes a lot of years to overcome that. And by the time I got to college, though, there was a movement in place for Asian American studies, for us to study Asian American history and not just, Caucasian American history. And there was really a sense of Asian American pride that was blooming and blossoming at that time. And I was going to college when this was happening. And so to discover Asian American theater was another branch of that. Mm-hmm. So I was ready for it. And I was also ready for it because, as I said, I was realizing that in my life, I wanted to create a life that not just had English literature in it,
right,
but all these other things that I loved. I was also working as a part-time job at the University Elementary School Library, which was emphasizing new ways of looking at education, positive reinforcement, for example, and oral storytelling for children. You know, there was a real emphasis on oral storytelling as an art form. So the librarian at the University Elementary School Library, her name was Carolyn, I remember, and she memorized stories, folk tales, you know, fairy tales to tell the children that came for story time there. She didn't just read a book.
Cool.
She practiced the art of oral storytelling. And I worked there and I fell in love with that idea. And at the time I was thinking, maybe I'll become a professional oral storyteller or puppeteer or something. But, you know, I was loving all these different aspects of classes I was taking. Everything from puppetry to, like I said, cultural anthropology and sociology. And somewhere along the line, it occurred to me when I took an acting class in my senior year, oh my God, I did that and I felt so at home in that acting class. And I said, you know, if I go into theater, I can use all these things.
Sure.
I can intersect with all these things that I love. You know, everything from psychology to puppetry to costuming to acting to, you know, and it was just a revelation to me. So when I went to see And the Social Dance at East West Players, added to that was the fact that there were Asian American plays, which I didn't know about. And so it all came together, I think, when I came to see And the Social Dance. This is the place
right, yeah,
where I can embrace everything I love.
Yeah. So how did you nurture that relationship if you were so clear, like, okay, this is my home. These are my people.
Yeah.
How do I get in?
It just so happened that East West Players was offering their first summer workshop in theater arts. So I took that first summer workshop. I was putting my husband through school at the time. And as soon as he was done and I was able to quit my job, I said, that's it. I'm going to try and become an actor. And so I took the first East West Players summer workshop, and there were classes in acting and dancing and playwriting, just all kinds of classes and all kinds of things. And I just absorbed it and drank it all up. And then I started auditioning at East West Players. I started understudying in plays there. I understudied in a whole bunch of plays, and I finally got cast in something. And then from there, you know, I worked at East West Players and plays, and then I branched out to other LA theaters. And then I started auditioning for equity theaters. At the time, I think the first audition I had was at Will Gear Theatrical and Botanical.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was Romeo and Juliet, where I played Rosaline, totally non-speaking role, but I got to, you know, run around and be emotional. Yep. And I remember Forrest Whitaker was actually in that production. He played Benvolio.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he was a student fresh out of USC.
Right, yeah.
And from there, I started auditioning for regional theater. I started to get some jobs in regional theater. And then, you know, that's when my career just started to roll.
And were you doing all this?
And then I got an agent.
Yeah, okay. I was just about to ask if you were doing all this without an agent, or how you kind of knew what to do next. Like, how were you? What was the guiding force?
I think I went through about 3 or 4 agents before I finally landed in the agency where I've been, you know, for decades, and where I still belong, BRS Gage. I love them, and they're such great people. There were a lot of different agents, you know, through the years then, and I was doing a play called Megabeth, a play, modern adaptation of the Scottish play.
Sure.
And it was sort of an avant-garde performance art piece, and we were doing it in a former swimming palladium for Hollywood stars that had now sort of fallen on hard times. And it was, we covered it in black tarp, and there were, the main character, Megabeth, was in the shallow end, and the warrior Macduff who was a Zen priest, was in the deep end. And the audience gathered around the rim of the pool and looked down into the pool to see the play. And
wow.
A lovely woman, Lenore Zerman was her name, and she was a young agent with, at the time, BRS Gage was called Bauman Hiller. And she, I think, took pity on me and said, oh, she's really good and she's too good to be out there on her own. And so she said, I'm going to try and bring you into the agency. And they said yes. And so I've been there ever since. Oh. It's now called BRS Gage.
And now I know, you mentioned auditioning for regional theater. I know you worked at ACT in Seattle a number of times. And so how did you start that relationship, and how did you, because I know you also worked in a number of theaters in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, I remember there was a play by Dory Baisley, who is still a friend. It was called Agnes Smedley, Our American Friend. And it was about an American woman. And she lived in the time of Margaret Sanger. And she went over to join the communist troops when they were, quote unquote, the good guys, when they were, going around the countryside and telling peasants they wouldn't have to starve anymore, and that they wanted them to join the revolution, against the landlords who, were exploiting peasants at the time. And so she went over and she actually joined Chairman Mao when he was at this place called Yan'an. And there was this amazing thing they did called the Long March, where they marched through swamps and through snow and through mountains, and to try and help the peasants through the revolution. And of course, then everything turned dark with the Cultural Revolution when the communists were in power and they were, persecuting people who had anything to do with Western culture. But I'm getting way ahead of myself here. At the time, there was a play that was about this at ACT Seattle, and I went to audition for it. And that's how I got cast, and that's where I first began a relationship with ACT Seattle. And then years later, I was able to bring Hold These Truths there, so it was nice to go back as a playwright. Yeah.
Sure. And were you looking to make any particular region your home at that point, or were you just,
No, I was just a, hungry, passionate young actor. I just wanted to work wherever anyone would hire me.
Right.
So I went to Syracuse stage, I went to Seattle, I went to Portland, really just anywhere that anyone wanted to work with me. I think I had a special passion for it because I didn't have an inkling of becoming an actor until I was, well into my early 30s. Mm-hmm. I was I don't think I mentioned that. I was on my way at UCLA. I thought I was going to go into the field of library and information science, and I'd actually been accepted into the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at UCLA. And what happened was it was time when California passed a proposition that was defunding a lot of California libraries. So I thought maybe it's not the best time to go into that field. And I decided to put my husband through school instead and get experience working in a library. So I actually worked in a rare book library, the William Andrews Clark Memorial Library, which is part of the UCLA library system. I did that for 5 years. Wow. And during that time, everything changed for me, and I decided when I came out of that job that I wanted to become an actor. Right. So the fact that I didn't grow up wanting to be an actor or even aware that I haven't had a talent for acting, it was also new and exciting to me that I was just so passionate. And looking back, I just remember I'll just go anywhere that anybody wants to hire me.
Right.
So.
Well, and so, a couple of things jump out, but, and I had this inkling, at least from doing research about your career, that I was curious if you almost benefited by, I don't know if waiting is the right word, but coming into this a little bit older, that there's just so much processing of yourself and insecurities and identity and all this stuff that as young people we all go through in our late teens and 20s and all that kind of stuff. And once you started working at some, big regional theaters, I was just wondering if your age, even though you were still young, but if that helped you kind of process, what you were doing, working with, whether it was name actors or name theaters. Do you feel like that helped at all?
Well, I think that being a little older and not having had any experience of theater to speak of until I was, around 30 years old, definitely helped in the sense of just the sense of the joy of discovering it and the passion that I felt. I would think back to those times where I so envied those kids on stage in high school, thinking I had no trace of any kind of talent like that in me.
Right.
And when I discovered I did have a gift for it, it was just such a joy.
Right.
It was such an amazing gift.
Well, I mean, it's probably like many people who, at 30 or so, you've been out in the world for 10 years and then maybe you finally realize, oh, this is what I wish I went to college for, that kind of thing that, you have that, awakening or realization at that time. So yeah, like you said, you were just really excited about it and really hungry for it.
Yeah. But I have to say, I don't know if I really had so much of an advantage in terms of maturity over younger actors who had been doing it for a while, because I think that it was a little bit of a disorienting experience to go from thinking that I was going to have a certain kind of career.
Right.
And then all of a sudden say, I'm an artist. And really not having any background for that or anything in my upbringing that led me to think of myself as an artist. So I did a lot of floundering around for a while.
Yeah.
Kind of like a fish flopping around,
Right.
And there was also, my mother had died very suddenly when I was 13.
Oh, wow.
And high school was a really difficult time for me emotionally and psychologically. And it wasn't until I got married in my early 20s and then decided that I wanted to be an actor at 30 that I got therapy. So as I was trying to create this acting career, I was also deeply into therapy.
Okay.
And so the two, in some ways, my early acting career and therapy were just inextricably bound to each other.
Right.
If I was delving into something in therapy, it meant I was delving into that part of a character that I was trying to create,
Okay.
I think I remember I was cast in a play called Tea by Velina Hasu Houston. It's her signature play about Japanese war brides who grew up on an army base in Kansas. It's based on her actual mother's story. And I played a character in the play who is actually a ghost. Her name is Himiko. And Himiko, throughout the play, is reflecting back on her life and the moments of abuse that she had to suffer and work through and try and transcend. And there was just deep suffering on her part. And, while I wasn't sharing the same exact history that Himiko had, I did have a lot of the grief that she had. And how do you move on and deal with and process your grief and then move on from it?
Right. Wow.
And so I remember that at that time, my personal and professional lives were really bound together in working on that role, that particular
Very cool. Yeah. I want to ask about a couple specific productions you did early in your career. One was, I noticed, speaking of the Scottish play, you did a production at the Public Theatre with Raul Julia in the lead role. And yes. I spoke with both Armin Sherman and Peter Van Norden. I think Peter was in the production, but it was when Raul did Macheath in the Threepenny Opera. I was just curious, they had their experiences of observing Raul, and I was curious, what your experience was, either, watching Raul in rehearsal or did you, watching somebody at that level who was, so good.
I was so starstruck the first day of rehearsal. I
well,
got
also
there
quite captivating.
Really early.
He's not a bad looking guy.
I got there so early and I was just walking through the hallway at the Public Theatre and up until that point, I had only done 99-seat theater and understudied at the Taper, which is how I got that job.
Oh, okay.
Because I had understudied in a production of Václav Havel's Temptation. He was actually imprisoned at the time that we were doing that production. But I got to go on as an understudy, and the director, Richard Jordan, liked my work, and he said he was directing Raoul Julien's Scottish play at Public, and he wanted me to come audition for it. Wow. And I got the role. I actually auditioned for Joe Papp, if you can believe that.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
And amazing memory. And so I'm walking in hallways and just taking in the history and seeing posters with Meryl Streep on, and right. It was just an amazing moment. And then who should walk around the corner but Raul Julia? And I got totally tongue-tied. And I said, Mr. Julia, I'm so honored to meet you. I'm Jeanne Sakata. I'm playing one of the witches. And he said, and I am Raul. And I was just knocked out. So it was an amazing moment. I still remember that moment.
Very cool.
And it was thrilling to watch him rehearse because what he had was this beautiful accent. And I had taken Shakespeare workshops where one of the techniques that was being taught was to try and ride the vowels and really use the consonants, but to ride the vowels, the emotion is in the vowels, this one teacher said. And so like I and oh and,
right.
And because Raul spoke Spanish, of course, that was his native tongue, he just naturally did that.
Sure.
And so I would listen to him and I would think, oh, that's what that teacher was talking about. Protest me, the baby of a god, hands under a mockery, hands, he would just ride the vowels naturally.
Wow.
Just as a native speaker of Spanish, it was just thrilling to listen to him.
Yeah.
And, it was just kind of an amazing baptism of fire for this little 99-seat theater actress.
Right.
To listen to somebody like that. He had this amazing, this amazing resonant, rich voice. And, it was kind of a thrilling beginning. Yeah.
And I'm really glad you brought that up because I think I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but I think, even if you look at his film work, I mean, he's still, and especially like for my generation, we, became very familiar with him through the Addams Family movies, but he's still delighting in language in that role. And so he brings that quality to his work. So, I mean, I know there exists online, the video of when he did, King Lear. He played Edmund with James Earl Jones. And it was, there were a lot of other great names in that production, but so it's a cool way to see him on stage, doing Shakespeare. He's an amazing Edmund, as you can imagine.
It was really thrilling just to meet him and work with him because, at that time, diversity, it was not a really common thing. Yeah. It was around that time. I remember I wanted to audition for the Heidi Chronicles. Production. I think it was a Broadway production.
Right. Yeah.
And, I couldn't get an audition. It was pretty much understood that they were just seeing Caucasian actors. Sure. For a certain role I wanted to audition for. But the irony was that the role I wanted to audition for was a woman who, she was representing, I think, a movement, a social movement, women's liberation and all that happening in the play. And, some of the things that were happening in the play were synonymous or happening at the same time as the Asian American student movement. And some of these roles were not race specific. Anyone could have played them. Yet it tells you something about the time that, I couldn't get an audition. And that was when, shortly after we did, the play with Raul. So a lot of us actors of color were really looking up to Raul at the time because he was, an actor of color who was a star. Right. And who was critically acclaimed. So, Very cool.
To kind of keep this Shakespeare theme, I also saw that you went and you were in LA, doing Richard II with,
Yes.
another very strong cast. You had Kelsey Grammer in the lead, and Armin Shimmerman was in it, and John Vickery and Norman Snow.
That's where I met Armin. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
I met
Very
John
cool.
Vickery.
Very
I
cool.
met a whole bunch of people.
So here you are, like,
It was a big cast.
yeah, and then, Norman was in the first Juilliard class, and Dakin was involved.
Natsuko Ohama was in it.
Right. So you're dealing with, and Kelsey is, of course,
Barry Shabaka Henley, yeah.
Right. And Kelsey, of course, is no slouch when it comes to classical work either. And so, was that like another education in watching these actors, or what was your experience of going through that show?
Yes, very much so. I think that, what was very interesting about that show, Robert Egan had directed it, and it was a multiracial cast, again, at a time when that was not a hugely common thing to see.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so you had African-American actors in the cast, you had Asian actors in the cast, Caucasian actors, and Latino actors. And so it was really great, because what I remember about that particular production, in terms of just hearing different actors attack Shakespeare with the different styles, and how everyone really had their own style of coming to Shakespeare, of doing justice to the text. But also, for example, I remember Barry Shabaka Henley had a speech where he sounded very much like a preacher, like a preacher from an African American church tradition. Mm-hmm. He had those kind of cadences. You could almost hear, audience response after some of the lines he said. It was totally unique to him. It was really lovely the way he did it, because he did it in a way that was true to his background and in a sense of who he was. And then Natsuko and I, we had a really fun experience where an actor named Winston, I was playing the gardener in that play. And so I had a scene with a Latino actor named Winston Jose Rocha Castillo, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And he had to take the place of somebody else for one performance. And so Natsuko Ohama, who was playing another role in this play, stepped in for Winston and played my assistant gardener, I think it was. And so Natsuko and I had become good friends by then. And we said to each other, let's just do this like we're a couple of Japanese American, like our mothers, and we're working in the garden, since so many of our parents were gardeners.
Right.
So that's the way we did the scene. We, just like two Japanese ladies working in the garden and gossiping together, which gave that a different spin than I think, any other actress doing that scene would have done it.
Right.
And so that's what I remember about that time, is that it was exciting to see. And then you had somebody who was very classically trained, like I would call the Juilliard, like training of someone like John Vickery.
Right.
Who, had that classical bearing and that classical Juilliard kind of feel. And Dakin Matthews, I think, was involved with maybe not the production, but a workshop of it.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think the workshop of that, also had Don Cheadle in it.
Oh, wow.
I remember Don Cheadle had dreadlocks then. He was a young actor with dreadlocks.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's what I remember. Everyone from Dakin Matthews to Don Cheadle to Natsuko to, Winston Rocha, and all bringing different cadences and rhythms and, accents to it. And it was just a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I think it's so important. I mean, it was great that you had that experience to see that there is no one way to do it. That, you can have a successful production or even a successful approach as an actor, specifically with something with Shakespeare that a lot of people are intimidated by, that you can find your own way into the material, as long as you're hitting the, kind of the markers of, is it clear? Is it emotional? Is it connected and grounded?
It's, yes. And along those lines, there are different preferences for Shakespeare depending on who you audition for.
Right.
Because I remember I took several classes from a man from Royal Academy of Dramatic Art.
Yep.
Rada.
Yep.
Yes. I forget his last name, and his name was David. And I had done several workshops with him. And he, being British, he talked about, rolling the R's,
Yep, sure.
the brightest heaven of invention, and there was just certain things he emphasized in his training that I absorbed. And then when I went to audition for Oregon Shakespeare Festival, I was doing this training, and I did my monologues that way. And the adjustment I got was, well, this is for an American company, and we don't want all those kind of British touches.
Got it.
We want you speaking like you speak every day, like Jeanne.
Yep.
And it was really hard to disengage from that previous training and do that, And I think I didn't quite get there. And then I didn't do Shakespeare for a really long time. And it's very interesting because just earlier this year in January, I was doing Othello at Noise Within that was directed by my dear friend and original director for my solo play Holy Truths, Jessica Kobzanski. And so I was doing one of my speeches as Lodovica, based on the character Lodovico, which Jessica made female. And, Jessica's note to me was, it just sounds a little well-spoken. And she said, and it sounds like you're maybe delivering it down here tonally. And I just want you to sound like Jeanne every day. And I thought, I remember getting that note when I auditioned for OSF. And so working on it with Jessica and with Nikki Dukas, who is our wonderful speech coach, dialect coach, I was able, just with some adjustments, to get it sounding much more like I hope I'm sounding right now, but also trying to do justice to the language and the poetry of Shakespeare.
Right.
I think Dakin Matthews is the gold standard for me when I think of somebody that does that.
Right.
He makes it sound like he's just talking like Dakin, and yet he does justice to the poetry of everything he's saying.
Yeah.
So, that's what I was hoping for.
Talking to Dakin was an interesting experience because, of course, he was a lifelong teacher too of English, so he almost has that. He certainly has that intellect and that curiosity. So it's a good match and marriage for him.
Yes.
I know around this time that we were talking about the shows that you were doing, you were starting to get involved in film and TV and doing on-screen acting. Yeah. And do you remember getting the TV movie Fine Things? Do you remember the audition or working on it? Yeah.
I do remember. I just had a few lines as Bernard's secretary.
Right.
I remembered what character I played. And DJ Moffat.
Yes.
He played Bernard. Yes.
And
I think Michael J. Fox's wife was in it too.
Yeah, I can't think of her name right now, but I know I can picture who you're talking
Tracy.
about. Yes.
Is it Tracy?
That sounds very familiar.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was one of my first TV jobs.
And were you scared out of your mind? Did you feel confident? Were you comfortable? Because I know.
Well, I remember that the director of that particular, it was a TV movie, as I recall. Yep. And the director of that project was a theater director.
Right, yeah.
He worked a lot at ECT.
Yeah, I saw that. It was Tom Moore. And yes, he did have a lot of theater credits. I mean, he ended up going on to direct tons of TV and film, but up to that point, he had just done a lot of theater.
Yes, and I think that was one reason why I didn't really feel intimidated, because I think at my audition, he mentioned the fact, you've done a lot of theater. I come out of theater too, and I felt at ease auditioning for him. And I think that there on the set, I think D.W. Moffat had also done a lot of theater. And so I didn't feel, and I think up until that point I had gotten a few TV jobs.
Right, sure.
And so I felt comfortable being on the set, and I liked what I was doing. I was playing a secretary, but I had a few fun little lines where I was poking fun at him. At my boss, the character of my boss, because he was interested. He had a romantic interest, and I think he wanted me to look her up and find out what I could find out about her, but he didn't want to let me know he was interested in her, but I knew. So I got to poke fun at him a little bit. So I really enjoyed that job. And Tom, I remember, was so lovely to everyone, from the stars down to, the under 5 players like me. He was just incredibly kind and attentive and praising of everyone and inclusive of everyone. And so it was a really lovely, early job to have as a TV actor.
Very cool. And was it just kind of snowballing, like one project not necessarily led to the next, but it just started, the momentum was there in terms of you auditioning and with your agent and all that kind of stuff? Was that how it all
Yes, the first agent, I had 3 or 4 agents before I found one that I felt really comfortable with, where everything sort of landed for me. And at the time, that first agency was called Feature Players Agency, and it was started by 2 casting directors. They saw a need to fill roles, like under 5 lines, that were small roles, but that required some real acting.
Right.
Because lots of times producers would say, it's a small role, it's just a few lines, but we need someone who can really act. So the tendency lots of times was that people would come in who were just starting acting, beginning acting, trying to get the first few credits, but they weren't able to quite fill those parts, with their acting abilities. So they started this agency for that particular need, for, they were serving actors who needed to get those first few credits, but it was a 5-line part where the fireman had to really be passionate and committed in his delivery of those 5 lines. So they started, it was called Feature Players Agency, and they helped a lot of actors get started just to get those first few credits. And then, what would happen is those actors would then move on to wanting to audition for guest star roles, recurring roles. And so that's what happened for me. I got to the point where I wanted to move on to audition for bigger roles, but I had those first few credits. And so, I was very grateful to them. And then I joined Bauman Hiller, which then became BRS Gage years later, which it is now. And I started going out on, bigger roles and got a few things. I felt like I went on hiatus a little bit in the last few years, because my attention was so focused on my career as a playwright. Yep. And Hold These Truths was going around the country, and I was really paying a lot of attention to that, because I started off having an agent, but then that agent retired, and I didn't find representation after she retired, so I was operating on my own, but a lot of things were happening with the play. So I kind of took my eye off the ball in terms of my acting career. I kept acting, but I just wasn't as focused on it. So now I'm in a place where I'm kind of missing that. And so I'm trying to do these 2 things equally well now.
Right. Yeah.
We'll keep our fingers crossed that I can.
Yeah. Tell me about having too many exciting projects. You're always trying to balance, the amount of energy you're putting into, and you want to put you want to put a full-time amount of energy into each of them. But of course that's impossible.
Yes. Well, my hope is that there is a good deal of cross-fertilization taking place in my subconscious that I don't even know about.
All right. Now I want to ask just a few more theater questions, and then I definitely do want to talk more about the play, Hold These Truths. But I noticed you worked with Che Yu a number of times over your career.
Che has been a major mentor and a hero in my career, and ass kicker. And
well, it's good to have somebody.
If there's
like
anyone that can nail you to the wall with a lot of love and passion, with only your best interests at heart, it's Che.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah. That's great. I mean, and I know you first worked on his play Red in Seattle. It was the premiere of it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
He wrote this play, Red, about a 3-person play about the Cultural Revolution. Yeah. And I did the premiere with Sapshimono and Michi Baral. It was directed by Lisa Peterson up at the Intiman Theater. And then we later went to Portland Center Stage. Yeah.
And yeah, so I was curious because I know, and you got a lot of critical acclaim for, you ended up playing Saab's part in LA. And
yeah, that was wild.
Yeah, so I was curious just to see somebody.
Well, it's a 3-character play, and it's a 3-character play in which there is a father and a daughter. And I guess to explain it, I'll have to do a bit of a spoiler because you don't find out about a certain relationship in the play until the very end. Maybe I can do this without the spoiler.
Okay, good.
No, let's just say that there's a Beijing opera star played by a male actor.
Yep.
And then there's a journalist. I think she's in her 40s, and a young Red Guard, who is played by an actress, say, in her 20s, around that age. And I was originally asked to play the journalist in the premiere, which I did. And then to my surprise, a few years later, Che, who is from Singapore and who had not been back to Singapore in a dozen years, his plays had been banned in Singapore from some time. And then he was invited. Yeah. But Che, is gay. And so his content in his plays, whenever they alluded to something that was, themed to be, gay, quote unquote, content,
right.
It was frowned upon in Singapore. And so his plays, were banned for a time. And after a period of years, he had been invited back to Singapore. I think they had, loosened that ban and invited him back. And he had done very well in the States, in the American theater community here. Yeah. And he wanted to direct Red in his home country. And so he approached me and he said, I really would like to consider you as Hua. Hua is the male Beijing opera star in the play. And I was flabbergasted. And I said, Che, I'm really flattered that you would even think I could do that role. But this is a play, about a father and a daughter. And I just don't think I could do that. I think you need a man to play this role. And he said, well, think about it. I think you could do it. So I thought about it and I got so excited thinking about it. I just felt, wow, when am I ever going to play a role like this? When am I ever going to get offered a role like this again? So I called him up and I said, Che, I think I'd really love to do it, but I'm a little scared because we'd be doing it in your home country. And, I'm an American. I'm not an Asia-born actor, and I'm playing a Beijing opera star. And I just feel like, holy cow, they're going to know the difference. No one's going to believe me as either a male or a Beijing opera star.
Right.
And, he said, don't worry about it. You'll just do like representative hand gestures. So I said, okay, let's meet at the taper. I'll read a few scenes for you. And if you like what you hear, I'll do it. So we met at the taper with some other people to hear it. And, I stayed up for most of the night, trying to figure out how to be a man convincingly. And I think I read like 1.5 scenes and Che looked at me and he said, I'm bored. He said, you can do it. Let's go eat. That is such a quintessentially Che-Yu thing.
It always sounds so funny. It's so easy for the people that have the job to be able to just say, yeah, okay, let's get going. It's, for you as the actor going, I want this job, and you're putting so much energy into it. It's just so funny. The other side of the table there.
Yes. He said, I knew you could do it. I was just humoring you. He said, you had to get that out of your system. Let's go eat.
That's funny. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious. So you went and did it in Singapore first, and then you brought the show to LA?
Yes. What happened was that Tim Dang was the artistic director of East West Players at the time. Yep. And they had also done Che's plays. They actually had done a trilogy of his plays, and they were in the old East Hollywood space. And now they were in Equity Theater in Little Tokyo. And, I think that Tim had heard that Che was going to be directing Red in Singapore in his home country and was very interested. And he I believe what happened is he asked to come see a rehearsal. He liked what he saw and he said, I would like to program this at East West Players after you do your singatory rep.
Wow.
So you're doing it at Singatory Repertory Theatre. He said, so I would like to bring this production to East West Players. So after we did it in Singapore, this is Emily Kuroda and Paige Leong and then we did the same production at East West Players. Yeah.
And I know it was well received in LA. Like, what was the reception in Singapore?
We did well in Singapore, I think. I mean, as I recall, not knowing the Singaporean theater community as well as I do, of course, the LA theater community. I remember when we did it here, we got great notices. The word of mouth was great on the show. I eventually was honored with a Theater LA Ovation Award for Outstanding Lead Performance. And I think in Singapore, I think our reviews were good too, as far as I remember.
Right.
I remember thinking I was much more anxious in Singapore because that was, of course, the first production of the play. And also because Che decided when we got to Singapore that I wouldn't just do representative hand gestures as Master Hua. I would actually dance Beijing opera moves. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I was terrified. I was
you've already
terrified.
Of course, you wait until after the long plane ride to tell you that.
Yes.
You're stuck here, Jeannie. This is what you got to do.
Stuck, yes. And the Beijing opera coach that we had there said in front of everybody at rehearsal, because I was trying to get out of it, and I said, I'm not a dancer, and this is Asia, and I don't think it's a good idea if I try and be a Beijing opera star here in Asia when I'm not a dancer and I'm an American. I was just really trying to weasel out of it. And then our Beijing opera choreographer, who was from China, put his hand on my shoulder in front of everyone and said, I have confidence that you can do this. And so then I had to do it. But I think I was put at ease when someone from Singapore came up to me and said, you know, your portrayal reminded me of myself, of the strict Asian Singaporean father I try to be to my daughter, because I think that is what's good for her. But your portrayal made me question whether the way that I am bringing her up so strictly, whether that is a good thing.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, well, really, it's just about the humanity of the character. And I started to worry less about the Beijing opera dance movements and about playing a man, and just really more about the humanity of the character I was playing.
Very cool.
So I think from that point, I was able to relax a little more.
Well, and you said you were, just bowled over when Che suggested the part to you. How, when you were nominated and even won the award in LA for it, I mean, had you kind of embraced that? Did you feel like you had done a good job with the part, or was that just another thing that you were just like, I can't believe this?
Well, I think the blessing of worrying so much about whether I would be accepted as a man and as a Beijing opera star had the effect of, the blessing of that is it had the effect of removing my attention from any sort of thoughts about awards or anything like that. I can honestly say it never entered my mind when we were at East West Players, any thought about awards, because I was so absorbed in, how to be convincing as a man and a Beijing opera star. And I was so absorbed in doing the movements perfectly. I practiced them over and over and over again. I got training on, how to lower my voice and speak more like a man without hurting my voice. I was studying Chinese culture intensely, and I was studying the Cultural Revolution intensely. I still have a whole row of books here at my house on the Cultural Revolution. And I was watching videos of Chinese opera star, Beijing opera star Mei Langfang.
Okay.
Just drinking all this up. The research was so intense for it that it absorbed every waking moment I had.
Yeah.
So, like I said, the blessing was I never thought about awards. And when that happened, it was just such a thrilling surprise. I had totally forgotten there were ovation voters coming to see it. And I think maybe the fact that I was so unself-conscious about what I was doing, maybe that had something to do with it. But yeah, that was a joy. Yeah.
Well, cool. Now, I know, speaking of opera singers, you were actually the second person I've spoken with who played Maria Callas in
Oh my God, that was another huge unexpected gift.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I spoke with Gigi Birmingham and kind of her, process, because of course, in this case, you're speaking at least from an American culture, someone that, and probably not this generation, my generation, but the previous generation, or much more familiar with her and her mannerisms and who she was and all that kind of stuff. So here you are playing a real person on stage, and you're singing and all that. So I was curious what your preparation was for the role.
Well, again, this was something that was a total surprise. Mm-hmm. I had seen Masterclass on Broadway.
Oh, okay.
Dixie Carter was doing the role at the time, and she was fantastic. And I walked out of the theater thinking, that is my dream role, and I'll never get to play it because of who I am. Obviously, I'm the wrong ethnicity. So I just forgot about it. But years later, it was announced in East West Players Season. I said, oh my God, they're doing Masterclass.
Yeah.
That's my dream role. And it was to be an Asian American version of Masterclass. And it was so thrilling to just walk in and audition for it. And I remember thinking to myself, I have no chance of getting this because I know next to nothing about opera. I mean, if I had known that someday I would audition for it, I would be educating myself about the opera all those previous years. But of course, I never thought I would play it, so that I didn't. And, but I went online. There wasn't that much time to audition, to prepare for the audition, I remember. And so I was trying to give myself a crash course in opera and in Maria Callas, but I saw this beautiful video of her online. I think she was singing Casta Diva, and I connected with it on such a deep level. And I thought, I don't know anything about opera really, but I understand something intuitively about this woman, about, beneath that diva crown she had in the opera was so much sadness, so much insecurity, so much passion for what she did, and yet such insecurity and such turmoil. And I could certainly relate to that part of her. And the love of what she did, I can certainly relate to that. So I just went into the audition really trying to focus on all the things I had in common with Maria Callas. It almost felt presumptuous to say that. This great diva, this great artist, of our times. And yet she was very human. Yeah. She was, she had, of course, great failures as well as great successes and great sadnesses because of those failures. She had great fear of not being loved, great losses. So I really, again, just tried to focus on the elements of her humanity.
Very cool.
And so, I continued to study and continued on that crash course all through the time I worked and performed the role. I got to work with Jules Aaron, who directed that production, and it was just a great time. My husband said he's never seen me so joyful working on a role.
That's very cool. That's great that you had that experience.
It was such a tragic role, but Jeannie, the actor, was experiencing so much joy.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so now I do want to talk about the solo show, Hold These Truths. And I know there's a ton of stuff we could talk about. But one of the things, I was just really curious about, kind of thinking about this, based on the actor you are, and the time we're in, that people are writing a lot of material because they are not seeing themselves represented, or they're not seeing opportunities for themselves. And I'm thinking, well, here's an Asian American actress, and it's not like there's, thousands of, parts as there are for maybe Caucasian actors, though you said that's changing, which is great. But I was almost wondering, was there ever a moment where Jeannie, the writer, was like, I got to write something for me? Or did that ever cross your mind?
It's crossing my mind now.
Okay.
It's very interesting because people have said, why don't you play Gordon yourself? Why don't you perform your own
interesting.
play?
Interesting.
Yes. And at times I've toyed with the idea, but, Gordon Hirabayashi, when I first discovered his story, it made such a profound impact on me. And I really wanted to, as much as possible, see the historic Gordon on stage. I first discovered his story when I was reading a book called The Courage of Their Convictions, and I saw a documentary film on Gordon. And I think it's a little hard to explain, but because my father's side of the family had been imprisoned in those barbed wire camps,
right.
And because I had grown up with that feeling of turmoil within myself and their feeling of, we have to hide this, we're ashamed of it. And I think when I discovered Gordon's story, it was so full of light and redemption for all those years of dealing with and absorbing and wrestling with that pain, with that psychic pain. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted very much to see the young historical Gordon on stage was because that first visual impact I saw when I first saw his picture was so profound on me. And I thought, I've never seen a story like this on stage before. I haven't seen an Asian American on stage like Gordon. I was so taken with the fact that he was so young when he legally challenged these orders.
Right.
And I did want to see that visual representation of the person that he was at that time. So while I did a staged reading of the entire play in Chicago at Che's Victory Theatre, and it was a very fascinating exercise, I've never had a desire to really do a run of the play myself. It was really fun doing that reading and to be Gordon, for 90 minutes in Chicago. But part of it too now, I think, is that I've seen such stellar actors do the role.
Yes.
And they've done it over years. And so their performances have grown and are so seasoned. And I love watching them still.
Yeah.
So I think that the way my thinking has gone in writing for a piece for myself has been to write about a woman in the Japanese American community whom I could play. And so I might be doing that. I'm not sure at this point, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. And I'm also getting more interested now, since so much of my recent history, the recent years has been in the theater. And I'm getting more interested in film now. So I'm thinking of maybe writing a part for myself to make a 5-minute film. Oh, cool. Something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and so did the solo play come out of something, did you feel like was missing creatively for you? Or where did I know you said you were very taken by the story, but not everybody would be like, okay, now I need to write a play about that.
Yes. Well, again, when I discovered Gordon's story, it was at a time where there were certain different pathways leading up to my passionate desire to see it on the American stage. One is that this was in the 1990s when I first learned about Gordon. And again, as I said several times during this time with you, there weren't a lot of Asian American roles at the time. Right. Yeah. That were beyond certain stereotypes, certain expected ways that Asians would be portrayed. To see a young Asian American college student who legally challenged U.S. government orders, well, I had never seen that on stage. I had never seen a story like that on stage. And, my love of theater and my growing awareness of who I was as an Asian American, as a Japanese American. Those two streams came together when I learned about Gordon.
Well, and I would say there was the third part of your journalism background. I mean, it's,
yes,
you're telling this story, and like like a journalist, there's, what's the structure of it, and how do you include the important parts,
yes,
the necessary parts, and all that kind of stuff.
The challenge of that, and actually probably the fourth and deepest stream for me is I had a great need to absorb this story because of what my family had gone through.
Right.
I had a deep psychic need for it. I had never heard of anyone that had challenged the orders legally. I didn't know this story.
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, if you grew up where people barely even spoke about this.
Exactly.
And then here's, this Gordon could have been a hero to, you and all of your friends as kids growing up if you knew about it.
If we knew about it, yes.
Right.
It flabbergasted me that I didn't know about it. And, I was helped too by the fact that I think so many streams of my life came together at this point where I discovered Gordon's story, because I could not stop thinking about it. It absolutely took over my brain, took over my life. I would wake up thinking about it. I would go to bed thinking about it. I thought about it all the time. It just would not let me rest until I wrote it. But I discovered this beautiful poem by Sansei poet, Japanese American Sansei poet David Mura. It was a poem called Gardens We Have Left. And in this poem, he had a few stanzas where he talked about Gordon coming to speak to his students. He was a professor at college. David was. And he spoke of the profound impact that Gordon had on his students. And he mused about Gordon's hitchhiking trip in this poem. And he did it in such a beautiful, beautiful way that it really gave me the feeling of the play I wanted to write. And so that was just the most beautiful springboard. And I remember when I first read this poem, I just wept, because it was like such a redemptive light, after so many years of the darkness of this huge traumatic event being stuffed away, into the chest of my family's history.
Yeah.
I actually have the excerpt here, if you want to hear it.
Great. Yeah, great.
So again, this is from the poem Gardens We Have Left by David Mura. Yesterday at the campus grill with my blonde, blue-eyed students over burgers and fries, Gordon Hirabayashi spoke of refusing the 42 curfew. After countless prayers to his Quaker God, he stood before the court and uttered a no they refused to hear. Sent to camp without a ticket, whistling in the dark, he thumbed his way there. Wild hairs scattering across the white-lined asphalt, the dipper spilling overhead its cup of stars. With wire-rimmed glasses and hair softly graying, looking almost a double of my father, he reached into that era, held it before me, pulsing like a vein. So when I read that, it just brought forth a big gush of tears.
Yeah, wow.
It was like a door opened for me. And
amazing.
Yeah, it was an amazing moment. And so every so often as I was working on the play, I would come back to this passage in David's poem, and I would say, this was the spark.
Right.
And then seeing a documentary film shortly after that by my friend John DeGraff, which you can see online. It's called A Personal Matter, Gordon Hirabayashi versus the United States. And it's called a personal it's called A Personal Matter because Gordon made the Constitution a personal document for him.
Right.
It's so easy for us to say, oh yes, the Constitution of the United States, and it's kind of this sort of like the Ten Commandments, something engraved in stone at a distance from us. But Gordon took it very personally, which was why he felt he had no other choice but to legally challenge orders that he felt were unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So David's poem and John DeGraff's documentary film just kind of lit me on fire in terms of wanting to try and develop a play about Gordon.
And how long did it take to figure out the structure of Hold These Truths?
Well, when I first read about Gordon and learned about Gordon, again, in the 1990s, one-person shows were not as common as they are now. They were a kind of newer art form. I remember I saw a solo show by an actor named Paul Link, and it was about his deceased wife and her struggle with cancer and his grief and having to move on, and work through his grief. And I think that was, for many, the first solo show they ever saw, or at least the first show that became very popular, as a solo show. And then shortly after that, I saw my friend Jude Narita do a solo show. It was different from Paul's show in that Paul was telling his own story and Jude was playing 4 or 5 different Asian American characters. But again, it was unusual. Not everyone was doing that. And so that art form was very much on my mind when I discovered Gordon's story, and I thought, wow, this would be an amazing way to tell Gordon's story. I saw him becoming all the people that he was encountering on his journey and legally challenging the curfew that was aimed at Japanese Americans, and then Executive Order 9066, which allowed the military to forcibly remove them from their homes on the West Coast. I thought, wow, that would be a great way to tell this story. So I immediately saw it as a one-person show. And then as I started to write it, I tried to write it as a multi-character play and then as a screenplay, but I found myself coming back to that first inspiration. And eventually that was the way that seemed the best way to go for several other reasons. I also wanted to create a piece where an Asian American actor would show off his virtuosity.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's really kind of remarkable. And, as the Steve Jobs quote goes, you have to trust that things are lining up, into the future. It's only with hindsight that you can see that they were, that this is, writing this play sounds like it's been about a 25-year journey, or at least to this point, and how it's doing. But it's been, like a 60-year journey for you of just being able to bring this story forth that it also predates you. It's in your family's history, and that it's something that as we talked about has so many streams, as we mentioned, of interest and inspiration for you, and it's something that not to take anything away from your acting career, but it's really taken off and had a life of its own. It's really pretty amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Like I said, as each step happens, you just think, okay, I have to do this. I'm going to try and accomplish this. And then you look back and you think, wow, I've really come a long way with this play. And, I have to really give credit. Like I said, I'd never written a play before when I first started out doing it. I had so many people help me, so many people who are still helping. Yeah. And so my special thanks section in the play is huge. I had so many people read it and give me suggestions. And then even after the play was produced, after it premiered and was produced in multiple places, people would come up to me and say, that thing that you say on this particular topic, that's not quite accurate. Maybe you could try saying this, or, so there's still a few things that I have to correct in it.
Well, I mean, that's good that you're open to that, that you haven't just said, okay, no, I'm done. I'm moving on to the next thing. It's nice that you can have that, I guess, editor's eye.
Yeah, well, I try, and I know it means a lot to people who actually went through these things or who have studied these years in much more detail than I have. I know it means a lot for them to get certain things right.
That's true.
Of course, it is drama.
Right.
And I remember when I was first working on the play right before our East West Players premiere in 2007, and Jessica Kobzanski, you know how wonderful Jessica is with new plays. She was working with me. We were still trying to nail the script down. And I was saying, she was proposing moving one event in the play to an earlier section of the play. And I said, well, Jessica, you know, it didn't happen chronologically until this point in the play. And she said, well, real life doesn't always conform to the demands of good drama. She said, if we move that incident to this play, it will build to the climax so much better. And then she found a way to do that. And so I learned that as long as you have, and then Jose Rivera, another playwright I was learning from at the time, he said, if you just stay with Garden's heart, I think you'll be okay. So I really tried to just stay with the story of Gordon evolving into someone that had no choice to legally challenge these orders. He just came to that point where he could not obey these orders anymore.
Right.
And the actual chronology of certain incidents became less important as long as I kept to that gradual story of his evolution.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool. Like I said, I know we could keep talking about this. I had a couple film and TV on-screen related questions, and we're going to totally change tone. But I want to ask about you working on the web series Yam Yam F.
Oh, yes.
And because I know, I mean, funny enough, there you were now working again with Sab Shimono, who you had done Red with years and years ago.
Yes.
And for those who are, it was a new channel for me, but it's You Offend Me, You Offend My Family, Yam Yam F.
Yes.
It's really funny. But I was, you know, I mean, and I know you've done a lot of on-screen work, but since this was a YouTube channel show, I was curious, how was it different from a traditional TV or film set, or was it the same, or was it freer or looser or more experimental? You know, I was just curious about that.
Well, I think because it was a experience where you were definitely doing a shoot. You know, everything was set and planned for, and it was very professionally conducted. But there was a sense of fun and play to it because there were friends involved. And also because there were, how should I put it? There were not those elements of pressure that you would have shooting a television show or a film. I just remember it being very playful and fun.
Cool.
Because everyone, I think, involved with that production, it was just a sense of let's get together and play. And it was authored by a director that has actually worked at Antilles, Robin Larson, and John Polono. Yeah, John Polono, an actor. They were good friends and had, actually they were friends. I think Robin was a friend of Justin Lin's. They had gone to school together or did some project together. And so he invited her to submit something to Yam Yam F. And so she got together with John and I think authored this web series. And she had worked with Suzy Nakamura, whom I had worked with years ago on a pilot. And I was playing Susie's mom, and Saab, of course, was a good friend. So there was just a sense of play and fun working with Susie and Saab, and there was a lot of spontaneity. And, you know, we used our own clothes and, you know, things like that. They were welcoming our ideas. So I love doing things like that because there's an informality. You're definitely observing a professional schedule.
Right.
In that sense. But you also have more of a sense of this is from the ground up. This is grassroots, you know, and I think that lends itself to more creativity and just a looser environment.
Yeah.
I think that comes across too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I watched the episode. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, and I know you were willing to talk about one of the shows you did called Threat Matrix, where you played this Cambodian character. And what I'll do is I'll post the text, the excerpt of dialogue that you sent me, so people can kind of follow along or have some context. But
yes, great.
This was a well, I mean, you can tell me a little bit more about the character, but since she was Cambodian, I was curious what kind of research went into you playing someone from Cambodia. You talked a bit about, doing Red and all the research you did for that. So we'll just kind of start there, and like how much research was done for the audition. And then, once you had the job, was there any additional research you were doing?
Oh my God. This was, in television, sometimes you're cast and you have to shoot just a few days later.
Right.
So I virtually had done no research on Cambodia other than what was referred to in the monologue. But
okay, yep.
Luckily for me, a couple years earlier, I had read Dr. Heng Yor's autobiography called A Cambodian Odyssey. I was good friends with a man named Jack Ong, who recently passed away. And Jack Ong became very good friends with Dr. Heng Yor. And I forget if they did a project together, but of course Dr. Heng Yor went through the Cambodian Holocaust. He escaped the Khmer Rouge and made it to a Thai refugee camp, I believe, and then to Los Angeles. And he worked and lived in Chinatown for a number of years and was tragically shot in Los Angeles' Chinatown. But he had written an autobiography, and my friend Jack was head of his foundation for many years. And I read Dr. Heng Yor's autobiography, which was horrific because it describes in great detail the Cambodian Holocaust. So when this audition came up, even though I did not have time to do any further research other than what was referred to in the monologues, I did have that book still. I pulled it off the shelf. And so when I got the job, I buried myself in that book for the next few days until shooting started.
Yeah.
But I also had to try and learn a scene in Khmer, which is the Cambodian dialect.
Right.
It's spelled Khmer, but as I recall, the pronunciation is Khmer. And they provided a dialect coach for me to come visit me at my home and work with me for a couple of days. But it's a very difficult language to speak if you've never spoken it before. The vowel sounds are very different from any language I've studied before. And I could not wrap my tongue around it. And I apologized to my coach and I said, I'm going to ask if they can find a Cambodian woman that can dub my voice in the scene because I don't want to embarrass the Cambodian community. But they couldn't find anyone. It was rare at the time to find Cambodian actresses. And they really did need an actress to do this scene.
Of
There's
course,
a lot of intensely emotional delivery of certain lines. And so Poon was my Cambodian dialect coach, and Poon said, if I can just understand you, I'll be happy. I know you'll have an American accent, but if I can just understand you, I'll be happy. So we worked very hard, and I guess I did okay, although I think they sped me up in the editing room so I would sound more fluent. Okay. But she was a character. It was a very sad story because, like Dr. Heng Yor, this character had escaped the Khmer Rouge to make it safely to the United States. But in this particular episode, her American-born son, who has never known any other home because of his high school involvement with a Cambodian gang, gets very suddenly deported back to Cambodia. Mm. And he is endangered there because of some political entanglements and has to go hide in the jungle. And he's hiding in a hut that actually my character remembers very specifically from my own days trying to escape the Khmer Rouge. And so when the United States Homeland Security team in this TV show, Threat Matrix, comes to me wanting to locate my son in this hut, I am giving them my memories of how to get there.
Right. Wow.
So there are agents who are physically in Cambodia trying to find their way to this particular hut. And I am in my Los Angeles home with another agent who is on radio with them, instructing them how to get there.
And so, yeah, I'm curious. I mean, I'm looking at some of the dialogue that your character has. There's very much she's putting herself, back in that space. And as an actor, I've always felt like, trying to remember these experiences that aren't in the present, like those are always, for me, some of the most challenging monologues that, you have you have to tell somebody right now something that happened to you 20 years ago or something like that. That for me, it's much easier to be like, well, let me tell you about something happening right now in this moment.
Yes. This was a long monologue. It was storytelling. And in the episode is actually on YouTube.
Yep.
It's that Matrix, the finale, so you can actually watch it. So as I'm narrating the story, they're intercutting the camera shots of me with shots of the team making their way in Cambodia to the hut. And then also they're intercutting it in another monologue with scenes of my younger self.
Right.
Making my way, trying to escape the Khmer Rouge. So just so you have a sense of that. And it's true. Sometimes those monologues are really challenging when it's so much in the past. And yet I remember feeling very at ease doing this monologue because there was so much detail in Dr. Heng Yor's autobiography about his home, the type of land that surrounded his home and his escape. There were so many incredible details that just burned themselves into my memory. And I used a lot of those details as I was working on this monologue. There were many accounts of him having to hide from the Khmer Rouge, having to stay silent, terrified that he was going to be discovered, hearing people scream, hearing people tortured. All those things I remembered as I was doing this monologue. And I think had I not read that book, it would have been much more difficult to audition in a convincing way for this role and to play this character. But I felt like since I read it, there was so much that had made such a deep impression on me that subliminally it was there, as I did it in front of the cameras.
Well, I mean, I actually been to Cambodia, and I remember going to Phnom Penh, and there, not far from where I was staying, I believe it was a high school that had been converted to a prison during the Khmer Rouge. And, and you could tour it. You could go through and, they had pictures and, it was really, I think basically just room to room, there were just, lots of photographs of what used to be there. And it was so horrific. I mean, it was so unbelievably horrific that, it just, and this was, I mean, think of like a densely populated city. Like this was a prison, a high school and then a prison just right in the middle of the city. And this wasn't, anything way out in the, in the countryside. It was like, this was going on like right in the city. And, I mean, there's so many atrocities that have happened in the world, but this was just something that like, just to be there and to walk through these rooms. And I mean, like you're saying, it was so, palpable and so overwhelming.
Yes. Have you seen the film The Killing Fields?
I haven't. And I'm going to sound like a horrible tourist, but The Killing Fields is something you can go see in Phnom Penh. But I'll tell you, after we went to the high school and the prison, I was just like, I can't take any more of this. Like this was horrible enough. Like I can't imagine going out there. Yeah.
Well, I only mentioned that movie because the man I've been talking about, Dr. Heng Yor, whose autobiography I read, he has a marvelous story. He came to Los Angeles and was doing social work, for immigrants in LA's Chinatown. He had an office there, and he went to a wedding, and there was a casting director at this wedding who was at this wedding who is trying to find Cambodian actors to audition for this film, The Killing Fields.
Oh, wow.
So she took a photo of Dr. Noor, and he ended up getting cast in the film. And he ended up winning an Academy Award for his portrayal.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Of journalist. I think you can see his speech on YouTube.
Sure. Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, cause it's the dialogue in the scene, like it's almost poetic in some way that, you know, it's fragments of sentences and things like that. And I mean, it's almost like, asking or not asking, but, one would assume your theatrical training only helped you kind of make sense of things and the structures of phrases and, you know, taking your time or whatever you wanted to do, that probably a lot of that was informed by a lot of the theater you had done up to that point.
It's, very much true. It has a lot of imagery. I come to big clearing, she says, tall grass, many mine. I see sand scared, my legs shaking. You know, we hear them, Khmer Rouge behind in jungle. You know, there's oh wait, that's the other monologue. I opened up a different monologue, but it's the same thing.
Right.
As in the monologue I sent you, there's just a lot of sensory memory. And definitely as a theater trained person, I used a lot of my theater training for that. I don't think I've really had an audition since then with such a remarkable monologue.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, listen, this has been wonderful. I know we could keep talking. I had a couple just short questions I wanted to ask. I think you even, maybe you alluded to it before we started, how you spend your days when you're not working, when you don't need to be on set, when you don't need to be in rehearsal. What kind of structure do you give your life?
Well, I love being outdoors. I've been doing a lot of hiking in Griffith Park. I live close to Griffith Park.
Okay, cool.
And, you know, it's so funny. We're such creatures of habit. So I've lived here where I'm living now near Griffith Park for about 20 years. And yet I always just tended to take the same hikes. Mm-hmm. And so this year I determined that I was going to explore all kinds of new paths. So I've been discovering all these beautiful paths in Griffith Park that I never walked before. And now I feel like, oh my God, why haven't I done this before? I went 15 years without knowing about this beautiful little grove of trees here. So I've really been enjoying walking in Griffith Park. And I love to cook and bake. So I find that cooking and baking is a great thing to do while you're working on a role. Okay. Because it sort of metaphorically represents what you're trying to do in the creation of a character, is that you have a stew and you add some salt. Oh, it's a little too much salt. I have to add a little more pepper. Oh, wouldn't some corn be good? Maybe just spice this up with a little, maybe some thyme and rosemary here. And it's sort of like we do with the scene. Right. You know, we get sort of the base of the stock and the meat or whatever, and then we start adding little things here and there to make it more interesting. And so I really love baking or cooking while I'm working on a role or while I'm writing. Very cool. And so that's what I've been doing lately. A lot of walking, some biking. When I bike, I feel like I'm a kid again, so I love being on my bike. I just found out about e-bikes though, which would make things so much easier. Oh, so yeah, sure. I'm excited about researching e-bike. But a lot of walking and hiking, a lot of cooking, baking, and researching e-bikes. Very cool. Is what I'm doing lately if I'm not working. Now, you mentioned your husband a couple of times, and as I do research, I see that he's, been able to be with you at a lot of the productions of Hold These Truths and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious, you said you put him through school. So what is it that he does, or if he's retired, what he did? He's a psychotherapist, and he's just a little ways away from retirement, maybe a couple more years.
Okay.
But he went to Fuller Seminary at the time in Pasadena, had a wonderful MFT program, marriage and family therapist. And so he got his, well, then it was called MFCC. So he got his master's there and then began getting his hours. And once he got his hours and was able to go to work, then it was my turn, we said. Yep. And so I took the leap into theater. But yes, it's very interesting having a therapist for a husband because I can talk about my roles with him.
Sure.
I can say, well, if his character is schizophrenic, what in his or her background might have caused that? If this character has had a great deal of abuse in her background, how does that affect what she's doing in the scene, what she's saying, who she's talking about,
right.
How much trust she has in who she's, all those questions. And he has some wonderful insights to the characters that I'm trying to create. But he also has a wonderful ability to just disengage from his work. And when he comes to watch me perform, it's really lovely because he's not really a theater trained person. So he's not giving commentary like, well, I think that actor's motivation could have been, he's not saying things like that.
Right.
He's just reacting to it fresh as an audience member.
Right.
And so that's really refreshing.
Very cool. And I know you guys just recently celebrated an anniversary, and it's been over 40 years that you've been together. And it sounds like even in the early part of your relationship and your marriage, that, it was very much a partnership of how you can support the other person. And, so I'm curious, it's probably one of those things where how did it get to be 40 years later? But,
yeah, we were so fortunate.
Well,
we've definitely had our ups and downs.
Of course.
All around.
Do you feel like there are some ideas that you're able to look back and say, well, this is one of the reasons we've been able to make it 40 plus years?
I think some of that is really luck. It's so fascinating, because when two human beings are in a marriage, there's so many things that can change within the relationship or change within the individual personalities of the two people in that relationship. And so many circumstances that can change. That means that maybe it's best that those two people not continue together. And so I think there's a certain amount of luck in the fact that our marriage has lasted as long as we have, because the changes that each of us has gone through individually and a couple has not, at least yet, gotten us to the point where we felt like we were no longer able to be in a marriage together.
Right.
I think that we've embraced those changes, but some of them have been very scary. Tim did not know that he married an actor. He thought he married a librarian.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very different kind of person.
It's a very different kind of life. So,
right.
He didn't envision a life where I was going out of town to do regional theater, or where he was,
that's a
going through
point.
gut-wrenching times where I was unemployed and had no prospects of employment anywhere. He didn't foresee the depressions that came from insecurities about me. He didn't sign on to any of that.
Right. No, that's
fortunately, but I think every union of two personalities is different. And I think that there's no shame in coming to a point where you say, we're better off apart now as individuals or with other people. I think that the fact that he is a therapist has shown us that there's just many, many different pathways in life. And we just feel very fortunate that we can still continue together, and we still are each other's best friends. Mm-hmm. I think one thing we had going for us is that we did really value communication from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And honest communication, because we were both from backgrounds that didn't really emphasize honest communication. We were both from backgrounds that emphasized keeping up a certain image, keeping up a reputation, keeping up a certain face. And so your life meant to serve that particular image or face or reputation to the detriment of honest communication. You know, you weren't even communicating honestly with yourself many times.
Right.
So years of therapy unearthed that for me. And I think the fact that he was wanting to become a therapist, we both valued that. And so we would both look at our communication and say, are we being honest with each other? And we want to be honest with each other, but we're scared, we're frightened because we're afraid of the consequences of that honesty. And so we had a value on that kind of communication and on countering our past. He was from a background, it was not, of course, he's not a person of color, he's Caucasian, but he was from a very Midwestern Lutheran family, you know, which had its own kinds of reputation and face to show to the world.
Right.
And so it was a dismantling that took place of a lot of the values that we had grown up with and saying, no, we're choosing not to adhere to those values anymore. We're going to value, you know, an honest communication. And so we had a set of goals in place from the very beginning. And that may have really contributed strongly to us still being together because we still have those values. You know, we recognize this is what comes with age, I think, perspective. So I'm able to look back on my family's background and say, well, they were doing the best that they knew how to do at the time.
Yeah.
And to let go of, or try to let go of the resentments and the rage that you feel that they didn't encourage that kind of honesty, you know, in their raising of me. And you can say, well, they did the best they did because these were the values that they grew up with. So these are the values they brought to us as parents and the habits. And, you know, a lot of that just comes with age, I think.
Yeah. Well, Jeanne, thank you so much for your time today. This has been really, really wonderful. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Nathan. It was really great to think about all these things again. One thing about being a hyphenate, you know, about being an actor, writer, producer, whatever, is I think I was telling you, your mind is full of so many things and things get crowded out because there's only so much room in the brain.
Right.
And as you were asking me some of these questions, I began to think about things, for example, things that I used to do as an actor that I had forgotten, you know, acting exercises that I had learned from Mako, you know, at the first summer workshop. And I thought, wow, I don't use that anymore. I don't say, what animal is this character? What color is this character? And I thought, you know, I miss those extras. I realized I miss the creativity that came from those things. So this has been really great.
Awesome. Well, great. Yeah. Thanks again. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Oh, also, I'll just put in a little plug.
Yes.
For Hold These Truths, you can keep up with the play on our website, holdthesetruths.info. And you can keep up with what I'm doing at JeanneSakata.com. I have a website there.
Great. Well, perfect. Yeah. I hope people do keep up with both those sites. And I feel fortunate that even though it was a staged reading, it was just shy of a full production of Hold These Truths. So I was honored to see it, and it's a great story. So hopefully it'll, you know, people will continue to come out in droves and check it out. Yes. Well, we're in San Diego Rep in November. Awesome. So cool. Tell all your friends down in San Diego, Nathan. I will. Hey guys, Nathan here one more time. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss anything ahead. Be sure to visit workingactorsjourney.com for additional info and links for items mentioned in today's episode, as well as all the episodes. You can follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. All the links are on our site and in the episode notes. Become a premium member and enjoy additional benefits and perks of the show starting at just $2 per month. head over to workingactorsjourney.com/premium to join the Working Actors community. Thanks again to today's guest and to everyone that makes these episodes possible. And a special thanks to you for listening. I'm Nathan Egan, and enjoy the journey.